Hey, is this thing on? Are we recording? Can I get a tech person? Oh, for the love of ed tech. Joining us today is Mike Edelman. So, hey, Mike.
Hello, how are you today?
Good. How are you?
I'm well. I'm happy to be here.
Good. Well, and we're going to start off by just asking you to tell us your journey into education.
Yeah, certainly. So I actually graduated with a bachelor's in elementary education. The first few years of my career were spent in a middle school classroom in suburban Washington on the Maryland side of the river. And there my teaching assignment was sixth grade Earth and Space Science, which was it was a ton of fun. We had the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity and the privilege to teach in a block setting, which gave me 90 minutes to really have a lot of fun with the students that I was working with. We got our hands dirty almost every day. The way we kind of approached our instructional practice there was we looked at our 90-minute period and kind of broke it into three distinct segments, with the understanding that the sixth grade mind definitely has a shelf life, right?
Right.
The downside to that setting is in my classroom we had stools, and if I think Caryn knows where the story is going. If you put 36th grade students on stools, by the end of the period, at least 15 of them have fallen off of a stool.
Right.
Um, after that had kind of run its course, I jumped the river, so to speak. I went to the other side of the Potomac, and I was in Manassas, Virginia, teaching in a fifth grade setting in an elementary school. And in that setting, I had the opportunity to teach all of the content areas in that traditional elementary school
Mm.
setting. Interestingly, that particular school building was about a mile and a half from the Manassas battlefield. So it was an area that was very rich in history, a really pretty area with the rolling hills and everything. But in that particular place, I kind of got my first taste of educational leadership, as it were. As our grade level chairperson, representing the building for all of the district's curricular decisions and things of that nature. In that particular district, the city of Manassas, at the time there were 5 different elementary schools before a reconsolidation and an opening of an intermediate building, which I was very involved with the design of their science classrooms in that particular building. But fortunately or unfortunately, I left the summer before that particular building welcomed students. And from Manassas, I went to the school district of Philadelphia, and in Philadelphia, I had the privilege of finishing my master's degree in educational leadership. And from there, I moved from the classroom to the started as an assistant principal and then a principal. And I kind of had a unique role in the principalship in that I went to the city's existing junior high school buildings and I reconfigured them as middle schools. And some people
Mm.
might think, big deal, what does that entail? Well, it's kind of a complete restructuring of the instructional staff in that we went from a school building that was organized and based on content areas. You've got your science department, your math department, your social studies department, and we
Mm-hmm.
reorganized into a fashion that was based more on grade levels teams, so
Right.
the traditional cross curricular teams that you see in the middle school. But we also moved the ninth graders out of those junior high school buildings and brought in the sixth graders. And I will tell you, if you want an
Oh,
immediate change in school culture, replace ninth graders with sixth graders. Now,
I
I'm
bet.
not going to say that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I will say that it was a very different thing, right?
Yeah.
The interesting thing is the temperament of the eighth graders from one year to the other. Completely different people,
I can
when
imagine.
ninth graders are around, the eighth graders are little pinballs and maniacs, right? And I say that with
Right.
nothing but love and admiration of the eighth grade mind. But once they became the oldest students in the building, they became, little adults. Their maturity
Yeah.
changed, their leadership changed. It was a really wild transformation in seeing students, 13-year-olds go
Mm-hmm.
from the second oldest in the building and kind of unpredictable hurricanes of youthful joy
Yeah.
to taking on the mantle of leadership, being the oldest students in the building. And
And that
then
just kind of happened naturally, right? I
yeah, I
mean,
mean, it was an interesting thing to observe, but it's nothing that myself or the administrative team or the guidance counselors, the teachers, nothing that we did to facilitate that change. it just happened, and we were grateful that it happened because, it kinda gave us a very sound base to welcome those incoming 6th graders who were used to,
Mhm.
the elementary setting where they're with the same teacher all day long
Right.
into a traditional secondary setting with, changing classes and lockers and, all of the drama that comes with that.
Yeah.
And then, after, 4 years of doing that, I had the opportunity to come to Cleveland to be a part of a charter school organization that was opening 3 different campuses, 2 here in Cleveland and 1 in Canton. And I was responsible for curriculum and professional development for these 3 campuses that were K to 8. That was kind of a
Mhm.
short-lived position because, that October 1st deadline that looms on the ODE calendar that determines total enrollment and state funding. The school had wildly missed on their enrollment projections, and writing was on the wall that there was going to be a small budget shortfall, and I knew
Yeah.
that my position was going to be one of the first that was eliminated. So fortunately, things all kind of fell into place very nicely, and I was able to move pretty seamlessly from the charter school situation to being responsible for an organization here in Northeast Ohio called the SMART Consortium. SMART being an acronym because in education we can't do anything without an acronym.
Right.
SMART
True.
exactly right. And SMART stood for Science and Mathematics Achievement Required for Tomorrow. And it was essentially a consortium of roughly 40 school districts across Northeast Ohio in Cuyahoga County, Summit, Stark, Lake, Lorain, and Medina counties that were all working kind of collaboratively to improve learning outcomes in mathematics and science. And this was born out of the TIMSS testing that had taken
Mm.
place in the late 90s. And that was one of the kind of those alarm bells that rang across education because it really shined a spotlight on the lagging science and mathematics performance of American students compared to their international counterparts, Singapore, Germany, and
Mhm.
whatnot. But I was responsible for all of the professional development opportunities that the SMART Consortium had facilitated regionally and across the state of Ohio. And at the time, the SMART Consortium kind of had a unique relationship with IdeaStream, which is the PBS station here in Northeast Ohio, where IdeaStream was essentially their fiscal agent, much like Soida and Think TV. And eventually, SMART was fully absorbed into IdeaStream, and we sunsetted that brand, so to speak, and that name and the bylaws. And we still offer a lot of those same services, but without the formal structure of that nonprofit entity. At this point, I'm now the director of education here at IdeaStream, and I'm largely responsible, and by largely I mean completely responsible for all of the work that we do in the pre-K 12 space. And I kind of say it broadly like that because we do a lot of work embedded in a lot of the schools up here in Northeast Ohio. We have a team of retired educators that will contract out to local schools to help kind of guide them through their school reform efforts or to
Yeah.
provide classroom-based professional development and coaching, things like lesson development, data analysis, assessment development, things of that nature, making sure everything that they're doing in the classroom, both instructionally and curricularly, is standards aligned. We do a lot of work in community spaces, libraries, Boys and Girls Club, preschool entities that aren't necessarily affiliated with one of the local school districts. We love providing support to parents on all matters of learning and social emotional development. One thing that we really um, find a lot of value in is helping parents reach to their children and helping parents kind of establish that culture of literacy in their home with the understanding that there are very real literacy barriers for some of
Mhm.
these parents as they're working with their children, and we're trying to kind of lower those barriers for participation. One thing that we like to do is help parents develop strategies that they can use in the home and they can use while reading to their children, things like using an expressive voice, very simple things,
Right.
things like talking about the illustrations and what we can learn from those illustrations and how we can add comprehension to a selection of literature just based on what the illustrations or the subheadings or things like that are telling us.
Mhm.
And then obviously we do a lot of work directly with students. For instance, we produce a television program called Newsdepth, which is kind of our attempt to talk about current events with children, have them asking critical questions about the world around them. And our intent in that particular program is much more nuanced than this is what's happening in the war in Ukraine right now, right? We
Mhm.
want to teach children how to use that information to make those key decisions that they have to make as it relates to being an engaged citizen. Kind of building off of that, and one thing I'm very excited about for this season is, along with the traditional teacher resources that we build for that particular show, we're also going to start building parent resources with the understanding that there's a lot of news inclined families. There's a lot of families at home that are watching the news in their home, but they just don't know how to talk about these very weighty, very, very touchy topics with their children.
Sure.
Thinking about my own children, I've got a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, and if they were sitting next to me, they'd be sure to correct me and tell me that they're about to be 11 and 13. Uh,
Get it
yeah,
straight.
exactly right. But they both pay very close attention to the news, and they're both very, very feeling children, right? So they often have a lot of trouble making sense of what they're hearing on the news, and why is this horrible thing happening, how can we help these people. Um, so through this effort, we're hoping to give parents and caregivers the tools that they need to kind of have those conversations with the young people in their lives, and to help them make sense of the news, and help them to use that information to then make those decisions on
Mhm.
how they want to be engaged citizens.
That's really cool. How do you come up with the topics that are covered on News Depth?
So this is actually kind of an ongoing thing, right? And I'm
Okay.
glad you asked that on a Wednesday, because I'll walk you through our production cycle, because it starts tomorrow, right? Every
Okay.
Okay,
Thursday, I
perfect.
get together with the producer of the show and the host of the show, and we kind of go over the stories that are available to us, and we make those decisions from a couple of perspectives. Number one, what do we think is developmentally appropriate for the audience? The audience being students in grades 4, 5, and 6. So we definitely try to steer away from those doom and gloom type stories. We try to talk about topics that we can root back to the Ohio Learning Standards, both the science standards or the social studies standards. Very often we'll have a lot of the standards sprinkled through the show. We also kind of think about thematically, what have we already talked about this year? What stories do we not want to beat to death, right? Over the
Mhm.
past couple of years, I think we've gotten to the point with vaccines and COVID and all of those weighty topics. I think we've gotten to the point where there's fatigue with those stories. So we
Right.
try to find the other themes. We know that the children that we're producing the show for are very interested in topics like social justice and environmental justice
Mm.
and environmental issues. So we try to steer in that direction. And then once each show is kind of outlined from the perspective of the stories that we're going to tell. Friday is basically spent script writing, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is all the editing process. But then layered on top of that, we also have been very fortunate to have the privilege of working with approximately 15 teachers from across the state of Ohio that they tell us how we're doing. And that's very important feedback. We meet with this group of teachers quarterly, and we'll ask them very pointed questions. What are we doing too much of? What are we not doing enough of? What are your students saying? What do your students want to learn about? And very importantly, we also want to know, what can we do to help you support learning in a way that's
Mhm.
standards aligned? What can we do to increase our relevance in the classroom? Are there any learning standards that your students are struggling with, and maybe a digital asset will help them with? And often
Mm.
that comes through in one of the segments on the show called Spot on Science. Spot on Science is our attempt to push out science news. I think very fondly to two segments from the last two segments that I had a lot of fun with personally, as the former science teacher.
Yeah.
One segment, one segment, we had the opportunity to talk to a mushroom farmer in Huron, Ohio, and it was really cool because the mushroom farmer totally geeked out on us on mushrooms and fungi and how they fit into the life cycle and into food chains and food webs. And we really had the opportunity to dive deep into the idea of decomposers and producers and consumers. And we knew going into that conversation with the farmer that this is something that students struggle with. So we were able to really give them a tangible example, something that they see at their grocery store, something that they might see walking through their backyard, to give them that real concrete, hands-on, very visual piece to explore this concept that we know students struggle with. The other spot on science segment that really pops to mind is a segment we did 2 years ago on carnivorous plants, and
Oh, fun.
you're right. And
Yeah.
first, from my own perspective, I had no idea that there were carnivorous plants in Ohio, but there are.
Hmm.
And but the neat thing about that particular show is we at the time on staff we had a very talented animator, and he made these really cool graphics showing how the trigger hairs on the plant react to an insect and how it causes the plant to close, and kind of the functionality of these particular adaptations that the plant had. And
Mhm.
again, we got to talk about the food chains and all of that good stuff, but we also got to talk about environmental adaptations that these plants had made to be successful, so to speak, in their environment, with the understanding that the reason they have to eat bugs is because they can't pull the nutrients out of the soil that they're in, just because the soil doesn't have the richness that
Hmm.
that they need to sustain life. Some other segments that really pop to mind that are kind of exciting, especially as we come into another election cycle, is Politics on Point. And
Mhm.
the one thing that I want to really drive home is Politics on Point is not a political segment, right? It doesn't talk about Democrats and Republicans and who's mad at who and all of that. What it talks about is functions of government. And
Mm.
so a lot of the things that have come up over the past couple of years, the State of the Union address, the nomination process for Supreme Court justices, all of those things, the way legislation moves through the chambers of Congress, we're able to really shine a spotlight on this. And it goes back to the idea of kind of empowering children to understand their role as engaged citizens, and that's our goal for the show, right?
Mhm.
We definitely want students to have that skill set and that set of tools to know what to do with information and how to interpret that information and use it to inform their decisions. And the Politics on Point is really going to be heavy over the next 2 years for two reasons. Number one, our nation's going to be celebrating its 250th birthday, and I'm not even going to get into the sesquiterno whatever. I simply can't articulate that word. Bicentennial is way easier to say, but also, we're going into another presidential election, so it's going to give us the opportunity to talk about the caucuses and the primaries and the delegates and what all of their votes mean. We're going to be able to get into the electoral college and what that is and where it came from, and why it's a thing, and why it's so meaningful. But again, all of that is to help children understand how their government works and what role they play in the government.
If you like this podcast, check out our latest, Minds Over Media, a collaboration between SOIDA and the University of Cincinnati, delving into diverse aspects of media literacy. Uncover the power of media literacy through insightful conversations and gain valuable insight from esteemed scholars and dedicated educators navigating this complex landscape. Check it out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So I'm curious, where do teachers find all of these resources?
Yeah. So that can all be found at ideastream.org/newsdepth. It also has a very robust presence on YouTube and PBS Learning Media. But
Okay.
I would argue that your best place to get it is ideastream.org/newsdepth. And the reason I say that is because at that particular website, obviously we have the library and the historical catalog of all previous shows. But on top of that, and this is where the real value add is from my perspective, that's where you can find each show's episode guide. And the episode guide is a planning tool for classroom teachers. It gives a rundown of the show. It shares what learning standards each story could potentially support. We're never directive with that. We try to be as broad as possible, with the understanding that every classroom is different, and every classroom has a different approach to teaching and learning. So we never want to tell a teacher that you have to use this to do this, but it's just a suggestion. On that episode guide, you'll also have the what we call the word highlights. So throughout the show, any vocabulary word that's used that's considered a tier 3 vocabulary word, those content specific words, we'll call attention to those words, and we outline those on the episode guide. Again, that's a planning tool. And those particular pieces of vocabulary, generally they're coming out of the Ohio learning standards, with the understanding that if it is a specific vocabulary word that is present in the Ohio learning standards, the expectation is students will know that word come assessment time, right? There's that accountability to those standards. Another helpful piece on the episode guide is a list of discussion questions that we provide to the teacher. These are questions that typically are, the penthouse of Bloom's taxonomy, if you will, right? These are questions that are going to require a little more analysis and application and critical thought. From the students. And again, these are just suggestions that a teacher could use to kind of engage those students, kind of in that thinking in their classroom. Then with every episode, we also create a comprehension quiz. That comprehension quiz is generally 5 questions. It's multiple choice. Again, thinking about Bloom, this isn't the penthouse. This is more of the basement, right? These are generally questions very comprehension based. And our thought here is we want to hold children accountable to any video asset that they're watching in the classroom, right? In my days in the principalship, nothing gave me more heartburn than when I'd walk by a classroom and I see a video playing day after day after day. I'd often wonder what's going on with this video. What are the students taking away from the video? How are the students accountable to the video? Or is it just, reward time, which, that's fine. But, we have to be mindful of instructional time and holding children accountable to the learning. But that's our thought process there. And then, along with every episode, there's also a newsletter that teachers can sign up for. And that newsletter generally goes out a day or two before the episode posts online. It posts online at Thursday mornings at 3 a.m. for you early risers. It's usually on Learning Media at that time, and then it's ready for broadcast. It's broadcast on many Ohio PBS stations, generally on Fridays or Saturdays, and it's also carried on the Ohio channel. But at any rate, that newsletter will give teachers a preview and overview of each episode for planning purposes. It gives a preview of the discussion questions and the key vocabulary from the episode. But then some of the built-in functionality too on the website is each episode is chaptered, right? And the reason we do that is we understand that every episode isn't going to be appropriate for every classroom start to finish. So that gives teachers the instructional flexibility to choose segments of the show, skip segments of the show, things of that nature. And that's very intentional on our part.
Yeah.
We understand that every classroom and every community is different across the state of Ohio, and we want to give teachers that flexibility to kind of respond to the needs of the students in front of them and to the needs and values of the communities in which they serve.
Wow, that's really great. And now I want to go check it all out because I kind of want to be a mushroom farmer.
Well, you know what? That would be a ton of fun. Another thing that I would invite the two of you to do, if you'll indulge me, if you know of any students in your communities or, in any of the schools that you're working with that are doing something remarkable either in the community or in the classroom, put them on my radar, because every single episode of the show has something called the A+ Award. And the A+ Award is our opportunity to shine a spotlight on students across Ohio who are doing remarkable things in the classroom, remarkable things in the community. A few examples that pop to mind, there was a young lady last year who was very inspired by episode 1 of last season, because episode 1 had a long block that was highlighting some efforts that a community was making to clean up some local waterways. And this young lady was inspired by that and went to a local stream in her community and cleaned up all the litter in the stream.
Oh, wow.
They're right, impressive.
Yeah.
A young lady in 5th grade. There was another student actually in Dayton who felt very, very motivated to make a difference in his community, and he set up a food collection stand in front of his local Kroger during the holidays, and he was able to collect about 500 pounds of food, and he donated it to
Wow.
a local food pantry
Oh,
over
nice.
the week of Christmas.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, it's great
Yeah.
learning about the wonderful things that these students are doing, and I love the opportunity and the privilege to show our audiences, what their peers are doing across the state, and how they're engaging with their community and some of the great things that they're doing in the classroom. Another example pops to mind. There was a classroom in Maple Heights. Maple Heights is here in the Cleveland area. They were studying maps of their community, and they're learning all about maps, cardinal direction, how to read maps, and all of that. But they noticed that on a map of their community there was an error, and they wanted to get the error changed. So they wrote a letter to the maps publisher, and the maps publisher put them in contact with the cartographer that did the map. The cartographer reached out to the classroom, and over the course of a couple of weeks, they made corrections to the map, and the map's going to be published, I believe, this year in the updated version of the atlases that the map was in.
Oh,
That's
cool.
But the cartographer reached out to the class showed them the error. The cartographer walked them through how to correct the error and explained how the error could have occurred. And I know it was a really neat thing to learn about, and the students that were involved really walked away with a sense of not only civic pride, because they
Mhm.
were representing their hometown, and they corrected a map of their community, but also knowing that they made a difference, right? I mean, this is
Yeah.
something that's published, this is something that's going to be used in classrooms, it's going to be something that's used by community members, and it was all because they
Mhm.
noticed an error and they reached out.
Yeah, well, and exposure to like careers too.
Right? Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
mean, because oftentimes you don't realize that making maps or drawing maps is an actual field or a
Well,
job
and
that
I'm glad you brought up the idea of career, because what we know about the Department of Education is,
uh-huh.
in their strategic plan, they've put a heavy emphasis on career development and career education.
Mhm.
And, we've kind of used that framework to explore STEM careers through the show as well.
Oh,
And
nice.
in the first 2 or 3 episodes last year, and we're going to do it again this year, we will pose a question to the students, and they'll respond via email asking them what STEM careers they want to learn about. And what we'll do then on our end is we will tabulate the votes, identify practicing STEM professionals in Ohio, and we will have the students write us the questions for an interview, and we'll ask the student generated questions of these STEM professionals, and we'll create a segment out of it, career spotlight.
How
Um,
cool.
I'm sorry, career callouts.
Career call it.
Yeah,
That's cool.
but the neat thing is it's all driven by the students. They are asking the
Mhm.
questions that they want to know.
Yeah.
They're asking of STEM practitioners, that are currently in the field, and the show's producer, Natalia Garcia. She's done a great job of finding what we'll generally or loosely call near peers, right? She's not
Mhm.
finding the 60-year-old biochemist. She's finding the 23-year-old woman who just graduated from, Ohio State, and is early in her career, and she's talking about her pathway, and things of that nature. But it's been a lot of fun
Mhm.
to highlight and to put a spotlight on these STEM professionals. And it's neat because we know that the questions that we're asking of these people are coming from the students. Last
Mhm.
year, we focused on an environmental scientist, we focused on a computer coder, an astronomer, and a commercial airline pilot, which was
Oh,
really
nice.
cool. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's
That's
really
cool.
cool. Thank you so much for talking to us today, Mike.
it's been my pleasure. I had a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to our For the Love of EdTech podcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation today and learned something you can use with your own students. You can find the show notes, resources, and more at www.fortheloveofedtech.org.
For Love of EdTech is produced by SOIDA, the Southwestern Ohio Instructional Technology Association, in partnership with Think TV and CET, the local PBS stations in Dayton and Cincinnati.